Welcome to Frequently Speaking. This is your host, Maxwellness. Now, here on this podcast, we're going to start to break down words that we speak outwardly and how their vibrations create what we frequently see. Now, in today's episode, we're going to delve into emotional whitewashing. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Frequently Speaking. Today, we are going to talk about the this is that ill stuff of, whether we're coming out of American society, whether we're coming out of culture and differences or masculine and feminine dynamics, this sense of ew that we're going to discuss today is really about the emotional whitewashing. Now, emotional whitewashing is just as bad as brainwashing, but it's a lot deeper sense and a lot deeper felt. So to address this truth that's in the room and to acknowledge these buried emotions can be done in a few steps. But it's all about taking a peeling back of those layers, including honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. So let's talk about the cringy ways that it shows up, though, and makes us feel really ew. So I wanted to deepen this piece a little bit more. If you are following my Substack, I wrote a full blog about this and just really getting kind of fine-tuned and a little bit precise about the senses of what's happening and what's very present in this society now, and especially in a sense of what therapeutics and even healing is really rooted in. And it's this concept of whitewashing things so many times. And wanted to share a little bit more on the deeper senses and just go dive a little bit deeper into the actual understanding of it and the true felt experience of what is the effects and these remnants that really echo out into this whitewashing concept, and really ask these hard questions of, are we actually a part of that whitewashing that we're doing? Because sometimes it happens really unconsciously. So if we really want to tie deep and really dig into the truth of the matter and the transparency with ourselves and that radical vulnerability with ourselves, these are some of the questions that we have to ask into these unconscious spaces. So I begin the piece by saying, that feeling that comes into the mind when you think of that, I just want off of something, or anything that brings that feeling of get off. It's like this real weird and like sticky feeling of like when a camel licks your face, or maybe when somebody's talking to you and they have that small white foam of spit that begins to form on the sides of their mouth, like that kind of ew. But really what we're talking about is that I want you to feel that feeling, like that and that is really like the superficial stance of it. But that emotion goes a lot deeper, because that is what the physical body is actually feeling. But speaking in terms of the emotional body, that feeling comes to be a little bit deeper than we inherently experience. It gets stored somewhere beyond the sight of the saliva-sided lips. So when we think about this emotional state of something being imprinted on you, how is that washed? When the fingers of a strange man stroke through your hair with a lustful look in the eyes, and as he tells you how beautiful and tender you are, or how the feeling of a slave owner's breath may have felt on the back of a melanated neck as the stripping of power took place thrust by thrust within a barn on a hot, moist Alabama night. And what about that emptying feeling of the insides that are synonymous with this empty fridge, and the empty arms of a 7-year-old child that had to wrap their own arms around themselves in a dark room to imitate the feeling of being full and being held? How do you wash that off the body, the mind, and the emotional being? Now, these are those deeper, more really like profound and inflared imprints that some of us may call nowadays triggers. But it's this deeper emotion that starts to come about, that with time and how things go past, and we have this like this brain concept of, it's in the past, and okay, we can get over it and move through it, and it's this whitewashing of really just implanting another memory or another emotion on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, until we're just unable to see it, as if like it never happened. So with this sense of whitewashing, like I was saying, we look into an example, right? For, let's say, Black Panther, right? Now, if you were to look back 15 years ago and do a Google search and type in Black Panther, you would see all of these prominent Black folk from the 70s, the 80s, and really just this empowerment. You would see photos of, Malcolm X. You would see photos of black leather and berets, and really empowered Black folk. But now when we type in Google, like when we type Black Panther in Google now, what do you see? You see Chadwick Boseman, you see Marvel. So this is another concept of whitewashing, and how that happens just on a physical and more informational standpoint in our brainwashing. But this concept is something that's bridged a lot deeper, especially when it comes to the emotional body and the emotional standpoint. So when we're looking at how we are a part of this emotional whitewashing and how it's been embedded and imprinted in us, in our behaviors, we can shift these things in a few different ways that I want to share with you later on in this piece. So the first stage I want to look at is really leveraging this load. I would encourage you to identify any of these flared imprints that may be coming up thus far, and trust that they will be supported and held in a way that guides towards change from this dissolution of these imprints. So later on, like I said, I want to share a few practices and some things that can help shift this paradigm that, if we feel, is a little bit deeper and we have been continually implementing and being a part of this behavior, we can start to really unearth those things. So a few steps is by looking and peeling back the layers that include honesty and transparency, and as well as vulnerability with ourselves. So this is a story of the washing that's been done by a certain type of personality and archetype, and also energy that still looms within this current day. It's also a way of asking and addressing it with a level of reverence that it deserves, and how that we can practically acknowledge this as today, as a man, woman, young or old human. In this day and age that we're in of healing, our individually recorded experiences are also the generationally and collective experiences that we hold within our bodies as well. And these things can't just be disregarded for these simple emotions that are in our body, because as they have been passed down, or as they've been echoed through our DNA, our epigenetics, all of these different concepts, they start to settle in cognitively, physically, as well as spiritually. And these emotions need to be acknowledged, recognized, and validated. So this is the way that they start to become transformed and transcended. And we do this through having a way that we can locate and identify the stains that are on those sheets, just as we feel that we've been tarnished or wounded. But this comes with an internal awareness, so that we can choose to do what we choose to do with it. We can release it, we can bring it into us, we can transmute it, however it may be, but we also have to understand what happened on those sheets, and those sheets being your body. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the science first, because that's what we all feel is credible and is something that we can believe, right? So each and every one of our cells stores information, and this information is stored through frequency and cellular DNA, or data, and it's passed down through our timelines. So this is where we get hereditary diseases, we get, hereditary psychosis, a lot of different things. This is even how you get your green eyes and your hairy arms and the habit of indulgence. That's all expressed in genetics within your DNA. But these scientists can shed some light on why we feel those deep ancestral connections to pains, burdens, resentments, and limitations that may not necessarily be ours. So even though they're not happening or they're very present within our present life and our lifespan, these things have still been happening, and this energetic frequency is still stored in this cellular DNA, which we have access to at all times. So just like the alcoholism that was present in your mother and projected into your young eyes has been activated through those latent genetic codes within you, either creating resistance towards it or assimilating it into your life as well, so that you have the ability and the opportunity to transmute it, not whitewash it. This gives you the free will to transform or to take that lasting effect. But this imprint is like a solar flare that sears the emotional body and creates these deep wounds that we call, but they're really just mechanisms that start to happen. But these mechanisms need mending and tending to. And the same goes for those denser emotions like shame and guilt and rage that have been tried to be covered through all these generations. Now, this is one of those things when you look at whitewashing that is what I'm really talking about here, about leveraging the load, because what happens is time is this load, and time is this thing that as more information gets pushed into you or more time goes on, we start to separate and distance ourselves from those emotions or those instances that happened. So when you think about your grandparents that were struggling and suffering, those experiences and those situations that they implemented into your parents, and then your parents took that information and those instances and those experiences, and then they treated you the way that they did, and however that was echoed through, that information and that link was still there between your grandparents and you. But to untie and unravel those knots takes that level of transparency and that level of vulnerability to dive into, rather than just washing it in the present moment. How do we show reverence for those emotions and those things that have been deeply incited into our genetic code? So taking into account what we know of emotions, they're set frequencies, and they can shift habits such as addiction, diseases, cancer, diabetes, whatever it may be. So tuning our emotions to a positive state of joy, happiness, love, and freedom can provide these shifts, quite literally, but also by bringing healing vibrations into our body. And this isn't always as easy as it seems, though. It's deeper than visualization or meditation. So, though in my process, right, I went through a series of deep internal reflections, utilizing questions to navigate neural pathways, memories, and narratives that I sought to shift because they were no longer serving me. This is where I started to begin to leverage that depth and the negativity that maybe of those imprinted or those flares, but I started to leverage that to my benefit. I was able to acknowledge these deeper states without submitting to their pulls into the past, which is a process I'm going to share with you a little bit later. But I want to ask you this question. What happens when you tap into that well, looking for wellness, and are met with the feeling of, ew? So this is where we really go into the washing concept, and we start to really sink into the feeling of being in those suds. It's like when you put your clothes into the wash, right? And you start loading everything, and you know the things are dirty, and you got the sheets on there, and you know the things that you and your partner just did. You're like, oh god damn. So you start loading everything up, right? And as you're putting that soap in, you're creating with that time the distance between that moment and what just happened. So these are the same concepts that really happen when we look into, let's take something as serious as sexual abuse. If something happened at a later age, right, you can imagine this person that is doing the same action of putting those sheets and putting those towels or those stained sheets into the wash. And then as they start to see those suds that are coming up, it's like it almost never happened. This is the whitewashing that I speak of. It's of the covering up of these emotions, the ways in which these emotions had to be swallowed on a cellular, biological, and energetic level, simply to be washed away in the rinse cycle of time. The only thing is that our bodies are synonymous with these sheets, and they're left to be cleansed from the blood and the sweat and the ew experiences. And then we're brainwashed into attempting to that they can be like rinsed by just a forgetful mind. Oh, I can just forget about it. I can just push it into the back of my mind. But in the mind, this resonates the words of a crowd of hateful humans as they demean, defile, and mutilate the beautiful melanated skin and this human that's on their way home. The feeling of the gripping of the bed sheets and the distance between human and her body increases at the pace of a tear falling from an eye, or the screams of anger, limitation, and no good listened to by a small child in the closet of his parents' bedrooms. The purity of these bodies receiving the stains of the experience of this world. The body is synonymous with those white sheets as it's ensconced with these emotional pangs of being deemed less than, demonic, and evil in the nature and of its pure magic as it's attempted to be burned at the stake. This is the whitewashing that I speak of. Feel that synonymous feeling in your gut differing from that camel's tongue? This is what I mean about the sense of how this ew goes so deep, and how sometimes that feeling, which is forgotten when the sheets are simply thrown out and forgotten to the rinse cycle of time, this is that same feeling. These stored emotions cause the same powerful effects of joyous, loving lies that have forgotten them so easily, just in opposing directions. But we have the empowerment to go back into our mindset and shift those behaviors. Because once we start to look into the mindset and how that mindset is creating these behaviors, and these behaviors are creating a state of being that we're really either not serving, or they're not really belonging in the present. This is why we need to truly acknowledge to transcend with our humanity still intact. Just by simply looking the blind eye towards the brighter future is a privilege of a certain kind of human that is the epitome of you. Standing on the backs of those who are still trying to rid these bodies, minds, and beings of the stains of the past. But there's hope in this all. It's the hope of the present moment. You're going through this right now as you're listening to this. It's that sick, sinking feeling in your stomach that is where the hope resides. Because in feeling this, you know that this is true. It wouldn't land if it wasn't already there within you. And as long as we have that truth, it can be a lifter of these stains, truly. So the attitude of addressing these forgotten moments in time with a passive laugh, a simple, it's in the past, or a, it didn't happen to you, so release it and let it go, is what perpetuates this you feeling that we can not deny, that permeates through our cells. We wish that with each circulation of our cells through our body, each transfusion and heart healing meditation, that this feeling fades, but it doesn't. And it's because even to this day, though the truth is in your face, whether it be through friends, family, or self, and even our children, we're reminded of that stain. And you can be the shift that lifts the stain. So I want to shift this a little bit and shift into the cycle from wash to rinse. And this is really about that sense of being lost in the suds and really coming out and being like, okay, rather than washing that and just in complete ignorance, like really placing yourself in those suds and going back into those emotions and into those places where we can't really see, where we don't really want to see. It's kind of burning, it's kind of hurting, it's kind of and just real you know. So when we think about our bodies and where they're stored, yes, we may have um, let's say expressive points like dance, like movement, like exercise, maybe it's drugs or sex, whatever, video games. There's this escaping and this washing that starts to happen. But when we step into this rinse cycle and we're looking from this empowered state of, you're actually going in to the stains and really remembering and acknowledging and bringing in that reverence, we start to really look at all this disdain and this disgust and maybe this repulsion and this rejection, really just sitting with it and expanding it into our body, so that all of these cells that are deep and latent within still pick up this vibratory sensation from past relatives, from present partners, and even future relations. So to rinse ourselves of this it's important to begin identifying truly with self. First connecting to this higher self and then building a rapport with it, then questioning for direction because it has this higher perspective and it's more witness perspective than you do. Rather than from doubt, we actually question for direction. This is exploration. So practicing this, many clients, as well as I, were able to follow these breadcrumbs of feelings that are a little bit more painfully revealing and deeply rooted. But this is what we ultimately become aware of, of the weeds that are in this Garden of Eden that need uprooting. We soon start to see the power in the choosing of what weeds that we're actually uprooting and how we can actually plant anew. And to tap into this latent power within these cells and start to leverage it to reach a cleaner and clearer state of wellness comes into how what we call nowadays raising your vibration. Releasing these paths from these flared resistances and instances and situations that have happened from before, this allows you to detach from those spaces in time and that distance and really closing the chasm and really quantumly bending space and time, but without that sense of washing. For me, connecting through the recognition of these emotions that has led to connecting to these paths were really keeping me from flourishing and allowing access to that potential energy for this transcendence. So holding them in gratitude and consciously choosing to look at them, see them, and confirm that they existed allowed for them to be uncovered and cleansed with this guided acknowledgement of their existence. So you can take a few steps into lifting these stains from the proverbial sheets, but it's done simply by acknowledging and accepting what's there, rather than being that person that blindly stares at somebody with a blank smile on their face because you have no idea how to relate. Knowing deep down at some level, as a human, you hear that pain, but are choosing to drown it out in your white noise of positive mindset. So I encourage you to listen at the level of your body, your mind, and being close enough to hear that latent frequency of what was thrown into the dirty pile of human flesh you asked to come into this world and cleanse. This helps to activate those cells. And this is just something I would like to share that is my belief. That is where we start to unlock cancer. And that's a completely other story, but there have been studies that have shown that in the activation of these levels and of these cellular levels of your body is where we as humans can start to communicate and heal the idea that is humanity within us. Now, this may all seem like a long shot, but if you can't relate to this, maybe I want to ask you to ask yourself, have you acknowledged the stains on the sheets of your life? Now, I want to come back to something a little bit more practical, right? I went into a lot of depth into this feeling and this felt sense of emotion, and really just the processes of how these stains and these sheets have been just really imprinted on us, and how we can actually go back and look in reverence and look with acknowledgement and recognition for these things, not to victimize, but to liberate. But what do we actually do about the ew? So I want to take you through a couple steps, and this has been a practice that I still hold into my practice nowadays, as well as sharing with clients of my own. So coming from a healing aspect and tapping into the science and neurogenesis, we can start by taking some of these steps. Begin by asking yourself a hard question that may be restricting you from looking at the hard truth. Something like, were my parents racist? Was my dad a misogynist? Have I been looking at my life through those lenses? Has my privilege given me a label or a lens of entitlement? These are some of those hard questions that can bring up hard truths. And I encourage you to open a space for these questions to be addressed with close ones around you. So some of these hard questions and hard truths you can take with you into a dialogue with a friend of yours, maybe a partner or a mother or a father, and just really open up a space of safety. And this gives into this sense of acknowledgement. And I want you to write out a list that gives you that ill feeling and bring them into your meditations with an open and forgiving and clear intention of validation. So taking this list, you can go into a meditation, bring yourself into whatever level of meditation that brings openness, spaciousness, and also calm and peace. And bring these aspects of just one thing at a time on this list into it so that you can bring a little bit more forgiveness and validation for these things that are presently asked. Another step is to use this activation practice to not only stir up the truth, but embody it by allowing for conscious awareness to be shown in those moments in your life where you've had the opportunity to address the you in the room. Next, practicing open forms of present vulnerability by offering information to loved ones around you in a safe space, in confidence of having your truth heard and held. So what this looks like is bringing vulnerability, which is offering information that people haven't asked you for, they haven't seen. It's just you offering information. But to create this, you want to create a container with somebody that feels safe, that you feel open, and that you have confidence that your truth will be spoken in that moment so that your vulnerability can be shown. And this can open up a level of deepening within your relation. And the last step is connecting with me. If you don't have access to any of these spaces or practices, I want to offer and invite you to reaching out to me and really asking any of those hard questions that you may not feel are welcomed or heard in some of your intimate circles. So my goal with this piece of this perspective and really this you is to widen a view of just how those feelings within us have an identity and how we can all have the courage to face them, embrace them and accept them, and also release them so that we can all begin to pour truth into our fears of the past. It is my belief that that is the true liberation of these ill feelings, by acknowledging them not in a sense of going back and having doubt and resentment and pity and shame and all these different things, but to go back with a sense of liberation because we have this present moment to really tap into that power of doing that. And this allows us to cleanse our sheets and begin anew, free of the deep echoes of the ew. And if you'd like to go into a deeper meditation, I would like to offer this inquiring question to ask. Ask yourself, is the perpetuating of the ew coming from me? If you like this episode and would like to explore more perspectives like this with me as we get a bit more intimate and intricate look into our internal vibrations, be sure to tune in to next week's episode and subscribe for more. Until then, keep frequently speaking what you frequently see.